Thank you, colleagues. We've got 3 very interesting presentations for the remainder of the afternoon. I also just want to apologize before the session start that after Sonia's presentation, I've asked JP to deal with the questions as I need to get my shuttle to leave for the airport. Our first presentation will be by Janet and Sukaina from UCT around building support for online learning at UCT.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. So I'm Janet Small from the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching at UCT, and my colleague Sukaina Walji is sitting in the audience taking photographs very rudely, I might say, of me. So wave your hand, Sukaina. And behind her, my colleague Andrew Deacon, wave Andrew, are with me. And so I won't make them stand with me for moral support, but they'll probably respond to questions if there's anything that they'd like to answer to. So they help with the presentation, so it's a joint presentation that I am standing here. So very interesting to be coming at this stage of the day because there's been a lot discussed already, and it feels to me a lot of this you would have heard before in some form or other, although some of the language people are using is a little bit different, although we maybe in the dialogue today and tomorrow we can see whether we mean the same things or different things about some of these words. So we're going to talk a little bit about making the move from a very sort of directly teaching, on-campus teaching university to university including online courses, and we're making that as our sort of theme for this presentation. And we're going to look at what that means. We're not talking about moving, as people have been making reference to, into technology as a solution to anything. We're talking about reconfigured pedagogy, looking at different ways of teaching and learning. And I think the presentation before lunch was also making reference to that, and quite a few of the others have been talking about what's new about teaching and learning in the current time. So we'll be looking at what that means and we distinguish between postgraduate and undergraduate, because from our point of view, they've got quite different needs and challenges. So we'll describe that a little bit as we go through it. So this is what we're looking at, how we see moving a university like UCT, which has been very traditional face-to-face campus, into something that includes online programs. So this is, and I think this is common to all the universities, and various speakers have already made reference to many of these, but just from our perspective, UCT leadership is talking about online in a very serious way in the last 5 years or so because of these pressures that are building up in our environment. It's looking at the global visibility of online learning. I think that in about 2012, the big adoption of MOOCs by the North American and UK universities was quite a wake-up call for seeing online as no longer the domain only of distance education, but suddenly becoming part of a mainstream teaching and research institution. And we also see in the local environment there have been growing partnerships with private providers that are doing e-learning of various descriptions, and in our own instance, there has been quite a successful partnership with Get Smarter around short courses and some online degrees. So, we've already had quite a lot of movement in our community around this. We've had quite a successful project creating MOOCs, massive open online courses that were supported by the senior leadership. And through this and the experimentation with online degrees through the Commerce faculty and Get Smarter, there's been a sort of need to really embrace online as part of our future. So last year we adopted our first sort of official online education policy, which is policy hasn't really been mentioned much in this conference so far. We think it's quite an important framing for your institution to have something that talks about how you see yourselves in relation to online learning. So that's for us was quite a milestone. Added to that, the strategic planning framework the university has currently adopted does include, and I think you were making reference to this quite a few presentations today, it's really about innovation, saying we're talking about changing pedagogy, learning and teaching to look at student success. I think it's also been raised by various presenters saying the point of our existence is student success. Okay, so this must be the driver for all our initiatives. And so this is underpinning our vision as well. So this is something we used quite a few times to sort of visualize and think about what we do, what we're doing at UCT, and I think it applies to most universities in South Africa and others, is that we have all kinds of educational offerings that are located, say, in the formal, we call them the top layer there is the formal sector. So that's where you're talking about degrees, credit-bearing degrees that are both undergraduate and postgraduate. The middle band there is what we call semi-formal. That's the short courses, the CPD courses, things, certification of various kinds, but less formal. And that bottom band is what we call non-formal, which are, in our case, we have a big public education program called Summer School. It could be public outreach, less formal learning. And the MOOCs really were merging in this bottom and middle space, which is less formal. And now we, as a university, have decided to really look formally at how we engage with online in the top band, the formal sector. Not that it hasn't been happening, and I'll talk about that right now. So if we're looking at what does it mean for us, it means talking about teaching and learning in different ways and negotiating what that means. It's not like we have a vision and we're going to move everyone there. It's about what are we trying to create here, and it's got to be a negotiated and co-created space. And as ourselves located in the Centre for Innovation, Learning and Teaching, see ourselves as kind of boundary workers between these issues around institutional policy and framing and wide context and the sort of academic programs and the real teaching. So we're trying to help negotiate what that means, creating this new pedagogy in the online spaces. So our experience of doing this kind of mediating is kind of has been twofold. There's a continuity, and as everyone's referred to, there's been years and decades of work of various kinds through the learning management systems that are pretty pervasive now in most of our universities. They're not new things. They've gradually been adopted, and they're now really a core part of most of our courses and operations. And things like we've gradually been introducing lecture recording, which is used by students for recapping and so on. And there's been the move over to block release and various forms of blended learning over many years. So this is a continuity of process. This is our learning management system that I think just about every course at UCT has what we call VULA, it's our Sukaina site. These are our MOOCs, which are now sort of part of the offerings available. There are 12 and a few more coming, so they're fairly, they're public outreach, but they're established as a frame. And so it's not a new thing. But then we also have had to mediate and deal with change that's brought about that's not planned. And I think the speaker just before T was talking about the impact of the disruptions. And I think many universities here have experienced this when there were shutdowns due to student protests. And then somehow in that blended learning became a big topic. Suddenly it was blended learning, unmediated, and not necessarily part of this continuum where we were building up. So that threw up a lot of issues for teaching and learning, for including students, the issues of inequality of access. Was it done in a way that included everybody? The student demands about the curriculum would have been put on the table. So this was a disruption, but it also brought the online space into dialogue. And so there's just a picture of the disruption. And in fact, I was looking when I was preparing the presentation for one of the memes going around at the time among students, which was about blended learning being this thing that they were suddenly given. It was like it literally was a mishmash. They had these wonderful memes with textbooks and pencils and computers in it. So it was the experience of blended learning being, not something which they'd been involved or mediated and negotiated around. So I think with where we are right now is that we've launched what we call a formal online education project, which is trying to take into account that long context and history and look for what do we mean in the next 5 years about trying to reconfigure pedagogy with some postgraduate online degrees and more blended and learning and flipped classroom, experimentation undergraduate. So we're seeing them as being two quite different things. So at postgraduate, our university is very interested in expanding. I think much like we heard from the professor earlier, we're trying to expand into new markets, and for people who can't come to the university physically, this is obviously makes sense to be looking at expansion using online. So in the postgrad space, as I was telling you, there's been a gradual move into looking at online degrees as a form of expansion to meet the needs of people who are not able to come to the university. And that has in itself many implications for the way in which you do teaching and the way in which students are engaged in learning. So that's a question which people have been talking about already for the day. It's the forms of learning design. What are you imagining the way learning has to be transformed when you're going into an online space? It is about the kinds of student support that are needed, which have also been referenced a few times, but it's really, really essential that you put in effective student support for if you're going to be going into a very purely or largely distance model. And then there's all the institutional structures, which I think Antoinette was talking about earlier, about having everybody on the same page and making sure you can give the students what they need. And in SILT, we're trying to help to look at opportunity for reconfigured pedagogies. Fortunately for us, we've already had experience through the Commerce faculty's partnership with Get Smarter, where they've done fully online degrees and have got some really incredible learnings which they are sharing, and we're looking at working those into the plans. So that's been helpful. And the partner approaches, which I think is one of the topics of this conference, one of the themes that JP talked about connections and partnerships, is that there are interesting opportunities arising for partnering with private providers. And there was also interesting invitations about collaborating around common areas of interest between universities. I think this is really the space we need to be exploring. So in terms of the online postgraduate space, where we're trying to look at reconfigured pedagogies, we as the we're calling ourselves boundary workers, need to look at things like the infrastructure, the LMS, what it's like to be a fully online student, really be very, very sure of what it means to create that space. And I think our MOOCs work has given us some early experience, although, as Gerrit said, it's not quite the same. It's not the same experience, but it's certainly different to a campus-based student. And I think that's going to be the sort of challenges we're looking at for the postgrad. So with the undergraduate courses, we're not really imagining there being fully online degrees, but rather trying to do more and more of the blend and integration of what it means to use technology effectively for student success and learning. So similarly, these are the challenges we want here, is that we want quality education, we want to improve student success and access, and so how can we use blended learning flexibility to achieve these goals? We're coming out of, it's not starting from nothing, like for all of us. We've all been doing this work for many, many years. So these are all part of the fact that we have already a good infrastructure at the university with a pretty good Wi-Fi access, improving the classroom, places for devices and so on. So you can actually imagine using technology in the classroom more effectively than in the past. But some of the similar questions arise here. We've had some very good experimentation in individual course level with the Stats 1000 course at UCT have felt that it really has worked well to do a very full blend, total flip of all their lectures, using their classroom space in a totally different way, in a workshop-y environment, and they've had really good results. So this is, for us, useful to have had some success models of early adopters. But once again, it's a conversation about how you teach and why and what you're doing and what are the impacts on the different student groups in your class. Are there any unforeseen consequences? Are you making sure all the students are on board and have what they need to succeed in this model? So that's a statistics example. And in this instance, I think we very much like I heard Antoinette describing, is I think it becomes about curriculum redesign and reconceptualizing if you're going to be doing a really good job of your blend. And this is what we think the opportunities here are for us to play that role of mediating, working with the successes that we already have, and working on finding good models. So for us, that's sort of the vision we're trying to create and work on. And I think there's quite a lot of really big questions we all share. It sounds like there's a lot of common questions on the table when I've been listening in the day. This is the one that we often cite to ourselves, and it's a particular issue for us at UCT. And I think I can see people laughing. I think we've all had this experience. So we've got to be realistic about negotiation and co-creation here, because it's never a linear path, and there are a lot of, as someone said, it's a human interaction. There are lots of people involved. Our institutions are old, they've got ways of working, and so if you want to disrupt in a positive way, you've got to find ways that you can engage the reality and people's needs, their problems and their challenges. So, that's obviously easy to say. To do is another question. But we'd like to, have a conversation with you in this room today and tomorrow about what do you understand about reconfiguring teaching and learning. It's all very well to say that, but what does it actually mean? What are we looking to create? And there are all sorts of adjustments required. That's whether it's on an institutional level and sort of real infrastructure changes and so on, as you were described by the Stellenbosch example. And also, but about academics and things like assessments. I was just talking earlier before. What does it mean to do online assessments? There's huge challenges around that we have to really take up. Then there's a question of students' involvement and the opportunities there are to teach things and teach in a different way, to respond to the challenges of fees must fall and roads must fall, about the way in which we're engaging students in the curriculum and in pedagogy. So I think that actually online can be a contributor if we do it in a way that's well thought out, carefully considered. Anyway, that's our questions for discussion. And I'm done 5 minutes early, so I've got more to hand over to my colleague who was asking for a few